Good afternoon, everyone. It is noon, and this meeting is now called to order. Mr. Coley, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Askew.
Present.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Here.
Commissioner Herbert.
Here.
Commissioner Fennell.
Here.
Commissioner Simpson Brown.
Here.
Commissioner Small.
Here.
Commissioner Worden.
Here.
Madam Chair, all commissioners are present.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coley. First on our agenda today, pursuant to Executive Orders 16 and 34, issued by Governor Bill Lieu, which allow for this public meeting to be conducted by electronic means to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak, I'd like to entertain a motion that this board makes the determination for this meeting to be conducted electronically. Commissioners, to make a motion, please make sure you are unmuted and start by stating your name. Is there a motion?
Commissioner
Jerry
Simpson.
Askew, so moved.
And do we have a second?
Celeste Herbert, second.
Is there any discussion from the commissioners? All right, hearing none, Mr. Coley, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Askew.
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Fennell.
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Small.
Aye.
Commissioner Worden.
Aye.
The motion has carried unanimously.
Thank you very much. Our next item of business is approval of the meeting minutes from April 16th, 2020 as mailed to the commissioners. Commissioners, to make a motion again, please start by stating your name. Do we have a motion?
Tybee Small, so moved.
Celeste Herbert, second.
Is there any discussion from the commissioners? All right, hearing none, Mr. Coley, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Askew.
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Fennell.
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Small.
Aye.
Commissioner Worden.
Aye.
The minutes have been approved.
Thank you very much. Before we move on to official actions today, I'd like to recognize Gabe for an update on KUB's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Gabe?
Thank you, Chair Hamilton. Yeah, I want to give you all a brief update on where we're at as far as internally with our folks, employees, and what we're doing with our customers with this COVID-19 pandemic response. As you know, 2 months ago, actually the day after our March board meeting, we went into a full-fledged pandemic plan, sending folks home, working from home, making sure our folks had the equipment they needed in the field, social distancing, all those things. And so we have been very active in that over the last 2 months. Like I said, a third of our employees have been working from home, and it's worked out really well. On May the 11th, we actually started returning some folks back to the KUB with social distancing in place. We've provided them all the necessary equipment and tools to make sure they're safe. And as you know, we've also been making sure our customers are been knowing what's going on. We use social media a lot of communication tools to make sure our customers are also informed of what's going on. As a lot of you have been doing also at your businesses, and we are following the Knox County guidelines. We actually are using the same 3 phases that they're using. As you can see, there's a lot of detail there over the next 2 months of what we're going to be doing as far as transitioning back to, quote, a new normal. And so our folks are fully aware of that. We've been communicating with them every day to make sure they know what's going on and answer any questions they may have. But the things that we are continuing to do for our customers are, we are still suspending disconnects for non-payment. We're not going to disconnect anybody right now for a while. We are waiving transaction fees for any types of payment. We always ask the customers to contact us if they need to make sure we can work out arrangements. And so you can see the plan there through July 6th when we open up our branch offices back for walk-in traffic. That's kind of a marker there for us. As always, if things turn negative, which we hope they don't, we will adjust accordingly. So far, the news has been really good in Knox County. We hope it stays that way, and we'll continue that. One thing that what you don't see yet on this plan yet is our plan to resume disconnects. That's intentional. We do not have that plan finalized. It will come after this for sure. And when we do roll out that plan, we'll make you aware of it. Our goal is to have that announced at the June board meeting, but it will be past all these dates on here and making sure our customers have plenty of time to work that out with us, and that we give them plenty of time to work things out. So that's something that we'll talk more about in June, but we're going to be way past these dates on doing those type of things. So with that being said, do you have any questions for me? Okay.
All right, I thank you very much, Gabe. I don't see any questions at this time, so we will move on into our first official action. We have several resolutions today that are related to the fiscal year 2021 budget. So I am again going to recognize Gabe to get us started.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Hamilton, Chair Hamilton. As you know, last month we spent a lot of time talking about the next fiscal year's financial plan. Today you'll be asked to vote on 3 separate resolutions that support those plans, including the budget and commitment authorities and the bonds that we need to do our capital projects. As you recall, we do not have any rate increases planned for this next fiscal year. And you will be asked to vote on each of those resolutions separately at the end of Mark's presentation. So at this time, I'd like to recognize Mark Walker, our CFO, to present the resolutions.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I hope everyone's doing well. My presentation today, as Gabe just mentioned, does cover 3 official action items. We will be reviewing the proposed budget appropriations for all 4 systems for FY21. Also have asking your approval for 2 new bond issues to help fund the water and wastewater system capital budgets for the upcoming fiscal year. And then finally, we'll discuss commitment appropriations for FY21 as well. The proposed budget in total is $962 million. That is for all 4 utility systems combined. And at that level, it does represent a slight decrease of about 2.2 million or 0.2% compared to our current fiscal year budget. And we are very pleased to be able to include in the budget $1 million for home weatherization for our lower income customers, and also $500,000 for our new toilet replacement program to help our lower income customers better manage their water and wastewater utility bills. And when you take the $1 million for home weatherization, you combine that with what we're expecting would come in through our rounded up contributions from our customers, which is about $600,000. And then with the expected TVA home uplift match, which is about $360,000. So you're getting close to $2 million in total contributions for home weatherization for FY21. And that should equate to about 200 homes being weatherized. So we're very pleased with that, and we believe that will obviously allow us to make some progress in that area. Our proposed capital budget is part of our total budget. Capital is $211 million for the upcoming fiscal year. That includes $94 million for our Century 2 infrastructure programs, which are for helping us to maintain safe and reliable services for our customers. And then we also have $47 million in the capital budget for water and wastewater treatment plant improvements. 17 million of that will go for the final phase of the biological enhanced high rate clarification project at Kauai, which of course is the final required project under the federal consent decree for wastewater. And speaking of the capital budgets, I mentioned a minute ago, we are proposing to issue $47 million in new bonds to help fund the water and wastewater system capital budgets, and that includes $30 million for wastewater and $17 million for water. And then finally, as Gabe mentioned a minute ago, there are no rate increases being recommended to help fund the FY21 budget. We had previously eliminated planned electric and gas rate increases. We actually did that last fall. And then more recently, with some capital budget adjustments, we are able to defer planned water and wastewater rate increases for the upcoming fiscal year. So no rate increases in FY21. And looking at the proposed budget in total by utility system and major cost component, for the board, you'll recall that you do adopt budget appropriations for each of the 4 utility systems. And for electric, that is $601 million for FY21. Gas, it's $129 million. Water is $94 million. And wastewater is just a little over $138 million for $962 million total. And the rest of my presentation on the budget, we're going to focus on the major cost components, so we'll be looking at it from a consolidated basis. And the first of those charts, we'll just see how the proposed budget compares to the current year budget. And it is down 2.2 million, 0.2%, so down ever so slightly. Wholesale energy costs at 468 million are actually down almost 14 million compared to the current year budget, and that's due to lower TVA wholesale rates and also lower natural gas commodity prices. Our O&M budget, on the other hand, is up about $12 million over current year. A number of factors driving that, including our new investments in home weatherization and water and energy efficiency initiatives. We've also added $2 million to our vegetation management program for FY21 to help improve electric system reliability. And then also we have higher required contributions to our pension and OPEB trust funds, and that's as a result of lesser investment market performance back in 2018. Our capital budget at $211 million is basically flat. There's always a lot of puts and takes within the capital budget, but no increase over the current year. Debt service payments are down $300,000. That's due to lower interest rates. And then our in lieu of tax payments and federal payroll tax budget of $39 million is down $700,000, and that does reflect the lower property tax equalization rate for Knox County. So in total, down slightly at $2.2 million. Now beginning to look at the major cost components of the proposed budget, and we'll start with the largest item, wholesale energy at $468 million. That represents almost half of our total budget. The biggest piece of that, as you can see, is $413 million that is projected to be paid to TVA for the anticipated purchase of 5.5 billion kilowatt hours of electric power to go meet the demands of our 211,000 electric system customers. And the other component is our natural gas purchases. 55 million is included in the budget to purchase just under 12 million decatherms of natural gas to meet the usage demands, anticipated usage demands of our 105,000 gas system customers. That budget also covers our the cost that we pay to the pipeline for reserving capacity to transport the gas, and also includes our storage related cost as well. So in total, $468 million for wholesale energy. Our O&M budget, $158 million total. We actually, for purposes of discussion, we've divided it up into 3 components. Labor-related expenses, which is the largest component, and then outside services, which represents payments that we make to contractors that do work on behalf of KUB, and then finally materials and other costs is sort of a catch-all category. On the labor-related expenses, total $75 million in the budget. O&M payroll, the payroll portion that is charged to O&M is $57 million. There's actually another $13 million in payroll that is embedded in various capital projects, and we'll talk about capital in just a moment. We have $10.5 million in the budget for healthcare costs for our active employees, and then just under $1 million for training programs for our employees across the organization. And then we have $7 million also in the budget for post-employment benefits, and that includes $3 million that will contribute to the pension trust fund as determined by our actuary, so it is a required contribution. $1 million in required contribution to the OPEB trust fund, and then we also have $3 million in the budget for matching contributions for our 401k plan for our employee participants. The outside services component of the budget, Jay, we need to shift back to O&M if you don't mind. Thank you. For outside services, some of the noteworthy items there include vegetation management. That's really the biggest at a little over $11 million, and that basically goes largely for our circuit tree trimming program for our electric distribution system. And then $4 million for facilities maintenance. As you know, we have 4 large campuses in our service territory, and we also have our corporate headquarters in downtown Knoxville, and then a host of remote sites for our utility system spread across the service territory. So there's some maintenance component of that that goes into the $4 million. And then also weatherization and energy and water efficiency are included in that component of the budget at just under $2 million. And then for materials and other costs, utility expense is $9 million, and that is the biggest item there. And that's largely for the electric power purchases for our water and wastewater treatment facilities is the biggest portion of that. And then we have stock and other stock and fuel actually goes into the $5 million line item component of the budget, and then $3 million for the treatment of water and wastewater. And I see we have a question. Do we want to go ahead and talk about the vegetation management question now, or do you want to wait to the end?
Let's go ahead and just hold all questions. We've got a list of them, so we'll just take all questions at the end. I think that'll be easier. Okay, that's fine. Moving on to our capital budget. In total, $211 million for FY21. 83% of that amount, or $174 million, is directly invested in our utility systems infrastructure, and that includes $94 million for our Century 2 programs, $47 million for investments in our water and wastewater treatment plants, and $26 million in customer growth. Those are the big items looking at it from that perspective. Looking at it by utility system, I know it doesn't show that way on the chart, but let's just talk a moment about each of the 4 utility systems capital needs. For electric, it's a $76 million capital budget for the year. Some of the big items there include $10 million for upgrades to electric substations, and that includes the beginning phase of a construction of a new electric in-feed station where we receive power from TVA, and that'll be located off of Western Avenue near the, I believe, the Cumberland Estates area. And then we also have $10 million in the electric system capital budget for upgrades to our overhead transmission lines. Those are our high voltage 69 kV lines. And then $6 million for replacement of 1,400 poles. For the gas system capital budget, that does total $32 million. We have $11 million for the replacement of 14 miles of gas main. And then we have $15 million in the gas system capital budget for growth, for the addition of customers, and then strategic growth opportunities. And that includes a couple $1 million to complete our work up in Raccoon Valley area as our one of our strategic growth projects in the northern portion of our gas system. And that's due to be completed late August or early September. And we're excited about that because there's several potential new loads, large customers that have expressed a strong interest in connecting to the gas system. So I think that'll be a good thing for us and for the gas system as well, and for those customers. Our water system capital budget totals $45 million. That includes $12 million for the replacement of 17 miles of water main, and also includes $20 million for our water plant filter resiliency project on Riverside Drive adjacent to MBW, one of the keystone projects of our water plant redundancy initiative. And then finally for wastewater, a total capital budget of around $59 million. And big ticket items there, $16 million for the replacement of 16 miles of collection system main, and then also $17 million for closing out the BHRC project at Kauai.
And that's maybe a rather long-winded overview of our $211 million capital budget. On our debt service budget, totals $86 million. That includes $45 million in principal payments on our outstanding debt and $41 million in interest payments. We have about $1.1 billion in total outstanding bonds for all four systems combined, so this represents the debt service on that amount for FY21. We are proposing to issue $47 million in new bonds in FY21. So there'll actually be a net increase in outstanding debt of $2 million by the end of FY21 when you subtract the $45 million in principal payments that will occur during the year. Looking at the debt service payment budget by system, wastewater is the highest at $36 million, and that's not surprising given that wastewater has over $500 million in outstanding debt at this time. Electric is next at $25 million, followed by water at $15 million, and gas at $10 million in debt service payments. And that is the debt service budget for the upcoming fiscal year. And then finally, the last major component is our in lieu of tax payments and federal payroll taxes combined. That does equal $39 million. 33.2 million of that will go to in lieu of tax payments to the various taxing jurisdictions in which our utility systems are located. That includes 21.5 million to the city of Knoxville, 10.6 million to Knox County, and 1.1 million to all the other taxing jurisdictions combined. For the city at 21.5 million, that does represent an increase of 1.5 million over current year payments. And for the county at 10.6 million, that's an increase of $700,000 over current year payments. And then the final piece of the budget in this component is our federal payroll taxes that we are required to remit to the federal government for our employees, and that totals just under 6 million at 5.9 million for FY21. And Commissioners, so how do we propose to fund the FY21 budget of $962 million? We do have budgeted revenues for all four systems combined of $857 million. And so at that level of revenue, that would cover or fund our wholesale energy cost, our O&M budget, our debt service payments, and our in lieu of tax payments and federal payroll taxes. It would also fund roughly one-half or $106 million of our $211 million capital budget. The remainder of the capital budget will be funded by $47 million in new bond proceeds and then $58 million in general fund cash. And so if you're looking at it sort of like a funding equation, 962 million equals 857 million plus 47 million plus 58 million. Now, Commissioners, I do want to let you know we talked about this last month, but we have identified approximately $60 million in capital projects and maintenance work that we have deferred in anticipation of COVID-19 and the impact it's going to have on our system revenues. We have seen some decline in revenue already in the month of April, and we forecasted that to occur in May and June as well. We do believe that those deferrals will help us mitigate the impact of the revenues or the revenues we won't take in as a result of the economic situation. The electric system, we do believe will also need to use a portion of the TVA wholesale power cost credit that we've begun to receive as a result of signing the long-term partnership agreement. You'll recall that's about $9.5 million per year. A portion of that is going to fund the home weatherization that we've previously talked about, but we'd also discussed that the remainder of it would be, subject to further assessment, but it is our belief that we'll need to use a portion of that to help offset revenue impacts for the electric system in FY21. And so I say all this in part to just make you aware that there is probably a decent chance for the electric and maybe to a lesser extent on the water and wastewater systems that we will spend less. That is what's in the proposed budget appropriations as a result of adjusting expenditures and deferrals for the COVID-19 impact on our revenues. So wanted to make sure you fully understood that. So we'll move on and talk a little bit about the proposed bond issues. We'll talk about it in aggregate first. Up to $47 million in total in new debt for FY21. That's 30 million wastewater, 17 million water. No bonds are proposed to be issued for the electric and gas systems for the upcoming fiscal year. The bonds will mature over a period of 30 years and will have a levelized payback structure, which basically means you're going to have the same level of principal and interest total payment each year, but the mix of principal and interest will differ, much like your home mortgage does. Mature over 30 years, so the bonds would fully mature in the spring of 2050. The budgeted interest rate is 3.25%. That's an average rate. And to put that into perspective, we recently completed, about 3 weeks ago, I guess, had a successful sale of our refunding bonds. And Chris Hood's going to give a full report on that here a little bit later this afternoon. But when the wastewater refunding bonds that we issued actually mature over a period of 25 years. And the true interest cost on those was 2.63%. And I say that because I think we can do better than the 3.25% that we've budgeted based upon what the market was 3 weeks ago and hopefully what it'll be here in the not too distant future when we go to market on these bonds. So we think we can hopefully beat the 3.25%. As you know, City Council authorization is required for the issuance of the bonds, water and wastewater in this case. Do anticipate, if approved by the board today, that we'll go to City Council in either mid to late June. And basically we want to get all our approvals and ducks in a row so we can move fairly quickly on this. We'd initially thought before COVID-19 that we would sell the bonds probably in early fall or late summer, but we're going to accelerate that. We know that the municipal bond market, like the financial markets, can be volatile and can change quickly. And it is stabilized somewhat right now, but we certainly want to move as quick as we can on this to get the water and wastewater money in so we can fund those capital projects, some of the projects that we have deferred to begin the start of the fiscal year. And we'll move on and look at the water bonds, not to exceed $17 million. And based upon the budgeted rate of 3.25% and the 30-year maturity on the bonds, we have proposed interest expense, or projected interest expense rather, of $9.7 million over the life of the bonds. The bonds would fully mature in March of 2050. We currently have $205 million in outstanding water debt. With the issuance of the new $17 million, we're also going to retire about $7.5 million during the year. So by the end of FY21, we'd have about $215 million in outstanding water debt, and that translates to a water funding or debt funding ratio of 50%. And then also to note, Commissioners, about 40% of our outstanding water debt, including the $17 million, will be repaid over the next 10 years, and that translates to about $90 million in total water debt to be repaid over that period of time. And move on to wastewater. Not to exceed $30 million in wastewater bonds. The interest cost projected at the 3.25% rate is $17.2 million over the life of the new bonds. The bonds would fully mature in April of 2050. We currently have $513 million in outstanding wastewater debt. We'll issue $30 million in new debt, due to repay $16 million in the upcoming fiscal year. So a net increase of $14 million would leave us at $527 million total outstanding wastewater debt by June 30, 21, and that's a system debt ratio of 59%. So I'm hoping that that'll be our high water mark over the course of our long range plan. We do expect for that debt ratio to steadily decline, as we have made previous commitment to the board that that's going to be at 50% or less by 2027. And then we'll have 33%, or about $180 million of our outstanding wastewater debt repaid over the next 10 years. And Commissioners, this chart reflects our projected or estimated professional fees associated with the sale of the proposed bonds. And you can see a familiar set of players that really serve as somewhat as our partners on our debt issuances, including Cumberland Securities as our financial advisor and Bass, Berry & Sims as our bond counsel. Obviously, Moody's and Standard & Poor's fees that we would pay to them for getting a rating on the bonds. Total projected fees are $275,000. That represents about 60 basis points on the par value of the bonds. And that is a competitive fee. We do assessments, comparisons from time to time, and we believe the rates that we pay, in particular for FA and bond counsel, are very competitive. And Commissioners, the last segment of my presentation is for commitment appropriations for the upcoming fiscal year. And just as a reminder as to what that really represents, in accordance with our city charter, not only do we need an appropriation by the board to cover expenditures for a given budget year, we also need an appropriation that would cover any commitment of cash expenditures beyond the upcoming budget year. And that's really what that's all about. Usually it involves, and the dollars represent multi-year projects. If we begin a project and we think it's going to be 3 years, we need an appropriation that covers not only what would be spent in the upcoming budget year, but also it's projected to be spent in the following years as well. For FY21, it's $120.7 million. And as it is typically sort of heavy on the water and wastewater systems, they seem to have more multi-year projects than the other systems. And you can see next year is no exception to that. That's a little over $86 million of the total commitment appropriation. And then Commissioners, the next slide shows some of the listing of the projects that support the need for our commitment appropriations for the year. And you can see at least a couple of multi-year projects that are on there, the MBW filter resiliency project for one, and also the electric infeed substation that'll begin in FY21 and certainly carry over into the following fiscal year. And then there's a number of just really broader categories of various Century 2 programs that we have, including for our transmission line improvements for the electric system and gas main and wastewater main replacement projects as well. And that's sort of a listing of what supports our need for the $120.7 million in commitment appropriations. And with that, Commissioners, that actually does conclude my comments for the budget and the bonds and the commitment appropriations. I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mark. We do have a couple of questions. First, Commissioner Pennell, please remember to unmute yourself and then ask your question.
Thank you, Kathy. My question is about the vegetation management number of 11 million. How has that changed over the, I guess it's been 10 years since that was sort of officially started?
It has increased over time, and certainly over a 10-year period. And what we have seen in particular, Commissioner Pennell, is that just the cost of the contract work for the vegetation management has risen as there's been a greater demand for that really across the nation from electric utilities and for other purposes. So there's a big demand for those services, and the cost of those services have risen steadily over time. We have made some adjustments in past years in the level of circuit trimming that we've done to help offset some of those rising, the inflation of the cost of the contractors. But now we feel like we need to add dollars. So actually, we've added a couple of $1 million to our vegetation management budget for FY21 to increase and do some more strategic work on our vegetation management program, but also increase the miles of circuit trimming.
Okay, in the strategic work, is that going to hopefully, maybe do more work now so that we can reduce the work in the future?
We have a number of accompanying initiatives for electric reliability that support our vegetation management program, which may not actually appear in that line item, the $11 million. There are other supporting programs and technologies that we're using to help with electric system reliability. But I think, it's probably going to be relatively steady at that level, and it may actually increase a little bit more in our electric long-range plan for vegetation management. And that's really because we've seen the effects of maybe a little bit of our pullback on our circuit trimming, and we need to increase that a bit and go back to a little bit higher level of number of miles being trimmed each year.
Thank you.
All right, next we have a question by Commissioner Askew. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Mark. I think I know the answer to the question, but I'm just making sure. I think in your first slide, you talked about utility costs to the water and wastewater systems. I assume that's electricity and gas we're purchasing from our power and gas units. So
Yes.
It's an intercompany transfer.
It is. You're exactly right. We may have, say, $6 million in electric utility bills for Kauai and MBW and the other wastewater treatment plants. That's a revenue for the electric system. Yeah, it's interbureau, correct. Or interdivision, I guess I should say.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, next we have a question from Commissioner Warden. Please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thanks, Mark. Question for you on, the world gas market rates have changed significantly over the past few months. How is that affecting our wholesale gas purchases going forward?
Well, basically it's cheaper, and which is good for our customers, our gas system customers, because we flow those lower prices directly onto them. So it's anytime the commodity gas prices go down, that's a good thing for our customers, because through our purchase gas adjustment mechanism, those are flowed directly immediately through to our customers.
Follow-up question on how, it's kind of interesting that we're doing a budget given all the changes that have happened. How much was revenue off for April, and what are our projections kind of going forward for May in the coming months?
That's a very good question, and sort of a combined look at what the impacts from April, and also May and June in our forecast for cash receipts. We're going to be down about $10.3 million as a result of COVID-19. I think in particular for the water and wastewater systems, that's going to be offset by some spending deferrals and just some savings and spending reductions for the remainder of the year. Maybe not so much for the electric system. And the gas system just seems to honestly sort of be humming along unaffected to a large degree by this. We've actually seen some positive numbers on the gas system. So it is more so, I think, the financial impact from COVID-19 is electric, and to a lesser extent water and wastewater. And but I think we'll be in good shape. To some extent, it depends upon how long this goes into the upcoming budget year. I think for water and wastewater, with the deferrals that we've put into place, and we're going to be able to somewhat easily manage that financially. I guess I shouldn't say easily, but manage that well financially. Electric is a little bit more of a concern on that, and that's why I do think we'll have to use some portion of the wholesale power cost credit from TVA to help offset losses there. But the sooner things get back to normal, whatever the new normal will be, obviously the better for our revenues and the better for our customers over time as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
All right, next up we have a question from Commissioner Small. If you'd please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Actually, John asked the question that I was going to ask, but I'll reframe it a little bit differently. First of all, looking at the new budget, I'm excited that we have put the $1 million into to help some of our most neediest customers, and so I'm excited that we are doing that and continually to put that money in addition to the $500,000 in to help with the toilet replacement. And I guess one question is probably for Gabe is when we decide to resume our regular disconnection, how are we going to roll that out? Because part of me, once we get back to normal, if we get back to normal soon, then we just can't go and cut everybody else off because we understand that people will have to get jobs, get, capital in order to pay the utilities. And so I would love to know what we're thinking in terms of that process. But the question is how it has, in terms of the revenues disruption, is how much of that has been non-payment of utilities versus other things?
I think, okay.
Because you said it was 10.3 million.
10.3 million is what we have forecasted. That's April actual, and what we're forecasting for May and June as well. That's what we've related for lower usage. And I guess, based upon the information we have to date, is we've attributed that to the COVID-19 impacts through timing of payments. Payments that haven't come in from utility bills that are due, and also just lower usage as well. In particular from our electric system customers, but our smaller and mid-sized businesses have been affected probably the greatest by that. So it's a combination of both of those things. So there is maybe some probability, we don't know how much, that the timing of payments will work itself out over time as we get into the coming months. And maybe if the economic situation can improve, then people are able to make payments. And I'll let Gabe answer part of that question, but we certainly will work very closely with our customers. And once we determine, I guess the date or when we anticipate resuming disconnections, we're going to give ample notice and certainly be working with CAC and other social organizations and give them plenty of advance notice to all of our stakeholders, particularly our customers, give as much notice as possible. And then be ready to work with them through payment extensions, through reasonable payment arrangements. We'll be gearing up for that with our customer representatives, and there is a decent amount of funds available. Project Help has increased funding for utility bill payment assistance. Lieu has got, I think, I may be wrong on this, but it's close to $4 million available, maybe a little bit less than that in Lieu funds for utility bill payment assistance. So there's going to be some sources out there, but we need to work with those agencies, and we need to make sure our customers are aware of those sources of funds to help as well. So hopefully I didn't answer it all, Gabe, but you go.
I don't have any left. All right. The shorter answer that I would say is that we'll communicate early and often. I mean, once we get this decided date, and I say a date, that'll be a fixed time. But I will say there won't be it will be a gradual. People will have time to repay us back. We will not make it a hard and fast this date and no later. We are going to be very, very deliberate, very careful. We understand people's situations. We ask that folks call us, and we will work out arrangements early and often. And so it'll be, when we set that date, it'll be even then 2, 3, 4 months past that when we say we need to work out some kind of deal. But we are very, very cognizant and very, very, I will say, we're going to make sure we do it right. We're going to make sure we help our customers out. They need it, and we want to make sure we'll be there for them. So I'll have a lot more next month for you all, hopefully, to discuss that in detail and get that communication started.
Thank you, Gabe.
All right, if we have no further questions from any of the commissioners, I think we're ready for our slide to come up for Resolution 1411. Can we get that on the screen? All right. We need a motion for Resolution 1411 on first and final reading. And remember to unmute your mic, commissioners, as you make the motion.
So
Jerry
moved.
asked
Les
you.
Herbert.
So moved.
All right, do we have a second?
Commissioner Pennell, so moved. Second.
Commissioners, members of the public were invited to pre-register to address the board on this action, and we had no one register to speak on this resolution. So, Mr. Coley, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Commissioner Askew,
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Pennell,
Aye.
Mr. Simpson Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner Small,
Aye.
Commissioner Worden.
Aye.
Resolution 1411 has passed on first and final reading.
Thank you, Mr. Coley. Next, if we could have the slide for Resolution 1412. If there are no further questions by the commissioners on this, then we will need a motion.
Tybee Small, so moved.
Is there a second?
Commissioner Simpson Brown, second.
All right, and again, commissioners, members of the public were invited to pre-register to address the board on this action, and we had no one registered to speak on this resolution. So, Mr. Coley, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Commissioner Askew,
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Pennell,
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner Small,
Aye.
Commissioner Worden.
Aye.
Resolution 1412 requesting budget approval is passed on first and final reading.
Thank you, Mr. Coley. We're ready next for our slide on Resolution 1413. And we will need a motion for Resolution 1413 on first and final reading. Is there a motion?
Sarah Pennell, so moved.
And we'll need a second.
John Worden, second.
All right, thank you. Members of the public were invited to pre-register to address the board on this action. And again, we had no one to register to speak on this resolution. So, Mr. Coley, please call the roll.
Commissioner Askew,
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Pennell,
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner Small,
Aye.
Commissioner Worden.
Aye.
Resolution 1413 related to commitment appropriations has passed on first and final reading.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to recognize Gabe to introduce our next agenda item.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton. Commissioners, although we do not have a rate increase planned for next fiscal year, we do have several other rate adjustments that need to be considered on first reading today, including a new pilot time of use rate for the electric rate and a purchase power adjustment change. I'd like to recognize Sherry Ottinger, manager of our rates and analytical services, to present you with these actions.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Gabe mentioned, today's presentation does include two main topics, the adoption of time of use electric rates, and then also several amendments to the purchase power adjustment. And as you are aware, any resolution impacting rates does require two readings, so today will be the first reading for Resolution 1414. The proposed rate actions that we have for you today, the first, of course, is the pilot time of use electric rates. This is for residential and business customers, what we would call small to mid-sized business customers. They have 1,000 or less kilowatts of demand per month. So in January, we did provide a presentation on these proposed rate structures. So today we'll go back through that and revisit those, and we will again submit a resolution requesting their adoption. We're also proposing several amendments to the purchase power adjustment mechanism. This includes needing to reflect current wholesale power cost. We also want to reflect these new time of use rates. And then last month you heard about the TVA partnership credit. So we need to make some adjustments there to be able to utilize that partnership credit to fund certain projects such as home weatherization and several others that I believe you are aware of. And then finally, we do have some minor housekeeping changes. Anytime that we are in the rate schedules or the PPA mechanism, we look for any items that we might want to clean up. So we do have a few of those today. One in particular, we will be amending the residential rate schedules for all 4 divisions. We'll be changing the wording there to say basic service charge. This is what our customers are used to seeing on their bill, so we just want to match that up. And then there are a few other wording changes as well. So commissioners, as you may recall, time of use rates have been available to KUB's largest customers for many years. In fact, all of our very largest customers, those who have 5,000 kW or above, they are all on time of use rates currently. And for the next tier of customers, those who have 1,000 to 5,000 kW, those customers have the option to choose time of use rates. But for all customers smaller than that, they currently do not have time of use rates available to them. So that is the purpose of this pilot. So with the completion of deployment of advanced meters that occurred very recently, we were very excited about that. And those advanced meters do allow us, they provide the ability for us to offer time of use rates to all of our customer classes. So initially, we do intend to limit participation in this pilot program to 200 residential customers and 150 business customers. So as we learn during this pilot phase, we may see that we need to make some adjustments before that we roll this rate program out to a broader population. Another key consideration of the pilot program is what we call the opt-out provision. Any customer who elects to take the time of use rate, and we do want to provide them the opportunity, if they change their mind, to be able to opt out. And we will require, though, if they opt out, that they remain on the standard rates for 12 months before that they could choose to return to time of use rates. That will just prevent any switching back and forth between the rates. So if this resolution is approved on 2 readings, these time of use rates would become available in November, and we would use the time between now and then to program and test our billing system, and of course to communicate and provide any education to potential participants in these programs. So before that we look at the specific rates that are being proposed for each rate class, I wanted to take just a few minutes to talk about, how do customers benefit from a time of use rate? So the key to saving money, if you switch to a time of use rate, is for you to consume energy as much as possible during the less expensive off-peak hours. And there are opportunities there. 83% of hours are off-peak. So what are those hours? So it's probably easier to talk about what are the on-peak hours. Currently, we are in the summer season. And so if you think about when that we are most likely to use energy in the summer, it's going to be late afternoon when it's very hot and air conditioning loads are coming onto the system. So the hours that are on peak for summer are from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday. The winter season will begin in November and it will run through March, and it's just the opposite there as far as time of day. The winter on-peak hours are the early morning hours when it's colder and more heat load is needed. So those hours are from 5 a.m. to 11 a.m. Monday through Friday. So on-peak hours are 6 hours per day, Monday through Friday. All other hours of Monday through Friday, as well as Saturdays, Sundays, and certain holidays, those hours are all off-peak. So that is how we arrive at having just 17% of the hours being on peak. I will note that the hours, the days, the holidays that are being designated as on peak or off peak, KUB did not just randomly select those. Those hours and days do match up to the TVA wholesale invoice. That is exactly how we pay TVA for on peak and off peak. So we wanted to have that relationship there, of course. So there are some customers who would choose time of use rates and they would save automatically. This type of customer, they are already consuming most of their energy during the off-peak hours to a greater degree than their peers. But for most customers that would look at the time of use rates and decide if this is right for them, they will probably need to be more intentional about when they use energy. They will need to be aware of when the on-peak times are and to avoid those as much as possible. So an example of this would be perhaps a customer would choose to do their laundry on the weekend. Or right now during the summer months, maybe they would wait until after 8 p.m. to run certain appliances. And this will enable them to achieve that lower off-peak rate. So Jay, next slide, please. So as we move into looking at the rates themselves, one thing we'll point out for the residential rate, you'll see there that the basic service charge of $20.50, that is exactly the same as it is on the standard rate. So there is no difference there. Where the difference comes in is, of course, we need to establish and differentiate between that on-peak and off-peak energy. So the proposed on-peak rate is just under 20 cents and the off-peak rate is approximately 7 cents. We know that for the difference between on-peak and off-peak to be meaningful, you need to have at least a 2.5 differential there. And so there is a 3.0 differential here. So we do believe that this is a meaningful differential for our customers. So residential customers, of course, the first thing they're going to look at is what am I paying today? So we have here on this chart the current rate, which we will typically refer to as the standard rates, and then our proposed time of use rates. So again, you see the basic service charge there. There's no difference. And then when we look at the on-peak rates, whether it's during the summer or during the winter, the on-peak rates are approximately 11 cents higher than off-peak. We would, of course, would expect the off-peak rates to be lower than what they're paying today, and they are lower by 2.5 cents. So customers who, residential customers who are looking at this rate will need to consider what their usage history looks like, what time of day, what days that they are consuming energy, and whether they have the ability to shift that and to change their pattern if necessary to save money. We'll look next at the small business customers. They actually will have the very same considerations when deciding if they want to sign up for this rate. The GSA 1 customers, and that is business customers whose demand is less than 50 kW each month. There's about 17,000 of this small size customer on KUB's system. And for these customers, the time of use rates that we are proposing, again, the customer charge, we would not change that. It would remain at $29, but we would introduce a demand charge of $2 per kW. And so demand charges within the electric industry, it's very typical for non-residential customers to have a demand charge. Up to this point, KUB has not charged this class of customers for demand because the meters that we used to have out in the system did not register demand. So now that we have that information available to us, we are proposing to introduce demand charges with these time of use rates for the GSA 1 customers. You may recall from the January presentation, we also had intended to introduce a small demand charge for the standard GSA 1 as well, but due to all that's going on in the world, we thought we would pull back on that rate restructure that we had proposed, and we've tabled that and we'll take a look at that again next year. So for the GSA one-time of use energy charges, very similar to residential. The on-peak rate would be 20.6 cents and the off-peak rate would be 7.4 cents. And so now we'll move on to the GSA 2 customers. This is the next level up. We would call these kind of our small to mid-sized customers. This is a very broad range of customers. Customers in this category could include large retail stores, large office buildings, restaurants, churches, schools, those types of customers. And again, it's very broad when you think we're going from 50 kW all the way up to 1,000. So when we started looking at this class, what we realized was that the majority of those customers, 2/3 of those customers, their demand is actually in a very small range from 50 kW to 100 kW. So we feel like the data is pointing us to split this class into two, with the break point being at 100 kW. And now we'll look at the rates for this class. And so for that smallest group of customers, smallest size, 50 to 100 kW, the customer charge would remain where it is today for those customers. It would stay at $95. Their demand rate would be $4.45. And then you can see there their on-peak and off-peak rates, 22 cents and 8.6 cents. Then for that larger sized group, again, about 1,000 customers with demand from 100 all the way up to 1,000 kW. We are proposing to increase their customer charge slightly to take it up to $110. Their demand rate would be approximately $2 higher than the smaller sized GSA 2s. And then, of course, that allows their energy rates to decrease. So that concludes the time of use rate portion of the presentation. So now as we look at the second main topic for today, that is the amendments to the purchase power adjustment. And so just as a reminder, the purchase power adjustment, the board voted that into existence and approved it back in about 2002. And that allows us to take any wholesale rate changes from TVA and to flow them through our electric rates automatically. So back during that time and prior to that time, TVA would typically increase rates maybe once a year, sometimes less frequently. But they decided to introduce a fuel cost mechanism. And at that time, their rates started changing on a quarterly basis. That has since changed to monthly. That's what we're very familiar with now, is that the TVA fuel cost change occurs monthly and flows through KUB's rates. So that's just a little bit of background on the PPA. The amendments that we are proposing for today, the first one is the time of use rate schedules that we just mentioned. As we introduce new rate schedules, we do need to update the PPA to include those rates in it. And then secondly, we want to reset the base rates to reflect current wholesale power costs. This is something that it's a good idea to do it periodically, but certainly when you're introducing new rates, it's best to put all of the rates on the same basis within the document. So we are proposing to update that and bring that current. And then and I should also mention there, that does not create any change at all in what we actually charge our customers. This is more of an administrative item that assists us with our accounting. So the third change that we are making to the purchase power adjustment, again, this was mentioned earlier in the Mark's presentation in reference to the TVA long-term partnership credit. We do need to reflect that credit within the PPA document. And again, we want to take those dollars and use those to fund items that will benefit our electric system customers. And some of those that have been mentioned, of course, are to increase the funding that we provide for home weatherization, it's in support of our solar purchases through the Green Invest program that you heard about last month. We could also use it for potentially deferring future rates. There are many items I think that it could be used for, and again, we look forward to discussing those. So if this resolution is passed on 2 readings today, The PPA amendments would become effective in July. So in conclusion, we have for you today Resolution 1414. And again, this will allow us to introduce time of use rate schedules for customers that currently do not have that option, the residential customers and the small to mid-sized business customers. And then we would also do the updates that we just mentioned to the PPA. And again, those housekeeping changes that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So if Resolution 1414 is passed today, we would be back in June for second reading.
All right, thank you very much. We do have a couple of questions. First, Commissioner Small, if you would unmute your mic and ask your question.
Hey, Sherry, great presentation. I just had a question. I was unsure about how the demand charge will affect the bill. Is that going to be a new charge? If you do time of usage, if you sign up for time of usage, then there'll be a new demand charge on there. I was a little bit unsure about how that would impact the bill.
Okay, the demand charge is new for GSA 1 customers, and so it does affect their bill. But again, everything as far as how we recover what we pay TVA, having that demand charge there means that the GSA 1 time of use energy rates are lower. So residential, we do not have a demand charge there. Okay. GSA 2, we would have a time of use demand charge, but that customer class currently has demand charges today, so they're used to seeing demand on their bill.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next we have a question from Commissioner Simpson Brown. If you please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Sure, you may have covered this in the January meeting, and I just can't remember, but how were the residential and commercial customers chosen to participate in the pilot, or have they even been chosen yet?
They have not been chosen, and this is a voluntary program. I think I intended to mention that and failed to at the beginning, but this is optional for customers. So it is completely up to them to choose to be on this rate and to sign up for it.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions from any commissioners? If not, then this is Resolution 1414, adopting pilot time of use electric rates for residential and business customers, amending the purchase power adjustment of the electric division, and providing for housekeeping changes to all residential rate schedules and non-residential electric rate schedules. This is our first reading, and we will need a motion on Resolution 1414.
Commissioner Celeste Herbert, so moved.
And do we have a second?
Sarah Commissioner. Second.
All right, second from Commissioner Pennell. Members of the public were invited to pre-register to address the board on this action, and we also had no one register to speak on this particular resolution. So, Mr. Coley, will you call the roll?
Yes, Commissioner Askew.
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Pennell.
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Small.
Aye.
Commissioner Worden.
Aye.
Resolution 1414 has passed on first reading.
Thank you, Mr. Coley. I'd like to recognize Gabe now to introduce the next agenda item.
Yes, Commissioners, we've talked a lot today about the impact COVID-19 has had on our customers. I would like to recognize Tiffany Martin, our Director of Customer Experience, to talk about another opportunity that TVA has given our customers to give them some relief. So, Tiffany.
Thank you, Mr. Bolus. Good afternoon, Commissioners. It's good to see and hear you all online today. I'm going to share some of the details of TVA's Back to Business Credit Program, and we hope that this will be something we can participate in so those customers that are eligible can benefit from it. To talk a little bit about the program itself, the program has been created to provide financial relief to large commercial and industrial customers that are our electric customers that have experienced either a full or partial shutdown as a result of the pandemic. This program essentially would require that the local power provider apply on behalf of the customer for a bill credit towards that eligible customers on peak demand charges on their bills. And really what this does is allows those customers to restart their operations without concern of the time of day or month that they decide to restart and begin re-energizing equipment in their facilities. This would be eligible to customers for usage in the months of April through September. And so as LPCs determine which customers are available eligible to participate and receive the credit, they then would look at their usage and submit for those credits to be applied to bills for those periods. The revenues for the program would be completely funded through TVA. So this is simply KUB acting on behalf of their customers to help apply for those eligible credits. With regard to how many customers at KUB that could potentially be eligible, we actually have 17 customers that might be eligible for this program. And as Sherry mentioned in her earlier presentation, many of these customers are those larger customers that have in fact always been eligible for a time of use rate, as well as those customers that have contracted demand of 5,000 kW or higher. So these are some of your larger manufacturers, some of your medical facilities. Many of our local hospitals are on that list, as well as we do also have the University of Tennessee on the list with regard to they're under a rate that would make them eligible for this program. After looking at all of those customers, it looks like only one at this time did experience a significant enough change in their operations. That is a local manufacturer that actually did have a full shutdown for a brief period, and then they also have now moved into a partial operations mode. So that customer would be eligible for the month of April for a credit, and I would assume that over time, over this period through September, they would also be eligible for additional credits. So if we're able to participate in this program, we would like to apply for a credit for this customer. Of course, there are 16 other customers that may potentially benefit. At this time, they have not had a significant shutdown that reduced their electric usage to the level that made them eligible to receive a credit, but we will continue to monitor usage for those customers and their operations to ensure that we do apply for additional credits if necessary. So in closing, the resolution 1415 would allow us to participate in TVA's Back to Business Credit Program, and essentially would allow our president and CEO to take any necessary actions and sign the necessary agreements for us to be able to apply for and then pass on those bill credits to eligible electric customers. That is all I have for today. What questions might you all have?
Are there any questions from any of the commissioners? All right, hearing none. Is there a motion for resolution 1415, authorizing participation in the Tennessee Valley Authority's Back to Business Credit Program on first and final reading?
Tybee Small, so moved.
Do we have a second?
John Worden, second.
All right, thank you. Members of the public were invited to pre-register to address the board on this action, and we had no one registered to speak on this resolution. So, Mr. Coley, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Commissioner Worden.
Aye.
Mr. Small.
Aye.
Mr. Simpson Brown.
Aye.
Mr. Pennell.
Aye.
Mr. Herbert.
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton.
Aye.
Mr. Askew.
Aye.
Resolution 1415 is passed on first and final reading.
I see what you did, Bill. You went backwards.
The last shall be first and the first shall be last.
You know, that's
paying attention.
That's a risky thing to do when we all have to unmute our mics to get ready to vote.
I just want to say that I was on it really quickly.
You're
Very impressive. I was
Thank
impressed,
you, Commissioner
John.
Warden. You saved us all. I will now recognize Gabe for the President's report.
Yes, Commissioners, this is the final presentation of the day. I want to recognize Chris Hood, Controller at KUB, to give you an update on the bond sales we just recently had, the good news in that. So, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Bolus. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I just want to provide you with an update from our recent bond refinancing. Very exciting news there, and while you generally don't hear the words exciting and bonds in the same sentence, you do when it results in $27 million worth of savings. So wanted to give you an update on this. On April 29th, KB sold bonds in each of its operating divisions to retire debt that was originally associated primarily with Build America bonds from 2010 and 2011. While we did have a slight delay in the timing of that sale, the municipal bond market treated us very well. In fact, we were able to refinance $77 million worth of bonds, and really through the active bidding and the number of participants, interest rates were generated, which allowed us to realize $3 million of additional savings over what we had originally projected. Original projections for the sale were about $24 million worth of savings over the life of the bonds. Ultimately, we realized $27 million net of proceeds, or net of any expenses. So let's look at the results for each of our operating divisions. Starting out with electric issued $14.4 million worth of bonds. We had 6 bidders on the electric sale, and Huntington Securities was the low bidder. They came in at a true interest cost of 1.498%. KB awards all bids based upon the lowest true interest cost from the best bidder. So electric, $14 million issued there to refinance outstanding bonds. Next slide, Jay. We'll look here, the electric division on that $14.4 million new issue saved $2.4 million. The debt was structured on level payment structure. This is exactly how the existing debt was lined up with the same maturity date of 2031. Once again, $2.4 million savings over the life of the new electric bonds. Next slide. Gas bonds, we sold $6.8 million worth of bonds. We had 5 bidders with Hilltop Securities coming in at the low bid of 1.593%. Talk a little bit more about what we did in addition to the $6.8 million bonds on the next slide. You can see that we actually were able to put in a cash contribution in order to retire the old debt, basically paying down principal early. In doing so, we took a maturity schedule that was supposed to mature in 2032, and through the lower interest cost and the additional cash contribution, we're able to now pay those new bonds off in 2030. Once again, same even payment structure of the debt with equal payments throughout the maturity schedule. Savings from gas, net savings, $1.8 million. One thing to note on the electric and gas bonds, you'll notice even payment periods, or excuse me, even payment structure over the life of the debt. When we get to the water, you'll see a little bit different structure of the debt there. Next slide. Water bonds saw the most action. There were 9 bidders on our water debt. You'll notice a couple things different here, a little bit more debt issued. We issued $19.5 million to pay off existing water debt. The big thing you'll also see in FHN Capital Markets bid, along with the other bids, are the interest rates are higher. Winning bid on this was 2.534%, and there's big reason for that is the maturity schedule is longer. So there's more risk associated with the longer debt issue there, thus requiring higher interest cost to facilitate that debt. Next slide, we'll look at the structure of the water bonds. We were able to save $3.9 million on our refinancing. As I mentioned before, the water does have a balloon payment schedule. This is the way the original 2010 bonds were lined up as well. At the time of issue, we needed this type of structure in order to finance projects on the front end, but not have as large of interest and principal payments. You'll see here when we refinanced, in order to keep ourselves more liquid, we kept that same structure with the refinancing, with the balloon payments on the back end of our new debt. Once again, maturity schedule stays the same at 2040. Remember this structure because as we move on to wastewater, we're going to see what we're able to take advantage of with our wastewater division. Wastewater issued the most refunding bonds at $28.2 million. Obviously, with the projects related with originally PACE 10 and then later on our Century 2 projects, the wastewater division has taken on a lot of debt over the recent years, and it's really good for our customers that we were able to refinance this level of debt and actually create the level of savings we'll see here. Once again, Huntington Securities, who won the electric bid, won the wastewater bid as well. And if you'll flip back one screen there, Jay, the low bid on that was 2.63%. We generated 8 bidders on the wastewater bid, so overall a lot of action from the bidding community on all of KUB's new issues. On the next slide, you will see the savings from the wastewater bonds. Wastewater was obviously the big winner from this refinancing. The big thing we had with wastewater was our partners at Cumberland Securities helped us to restructure this debt. The wastewater debt originally looked like the water debt with lower principal payments on the front end and then some very large balloon payments in the last 2 or 3 years of the debt issue, which matures in 2045. Cumberland restructured the debt, flattened out the debt for us, which does a couple of things. One, it generates the majority of the savings you see, almost $19 million, but it also allows us to pay larger principal amounts up front. Even payment structure puts more pressure on our current budgets to pay the debt down sooner, but it really helps us with some of that debt level and debt service that we've got in our wastewater division. So that brings us to all the good news as far as the refinancing. A couple of housekeeping items here on necessary disclosures. The total fees, which were netted from the proceeds of the issues, are $450,000. That's right at what we thought they would be from our initial resolution to the board requesting this refinancing. You can see who all was paid, what amounts, and this is the same players that Mark just mentioned in his presentation earlier about the new bonds. A couple of other housekeeping items. Each of you should have received the official statement that Cumberland issued with the bonds, as well as some other documents relating to outstanding debt and some of our other tax disclosures. Those same documents are available on KUB's website. So overall, good day for KUB, good day for KUB's customers.
Thank you, Chris. Do we have any questions from any of the commissioners about our bond refinancing? All right, thank you very much. Moving on, we also requested that any members of the public who wanted to address the board today at the conclusion of our meeting pre-register, and we had no one register to make comments today. So before we adjourn the board meeting, are there any other questions or comments or any other business from the commissioners? Hearing none, this meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See y'all.
Bye.
Great job.
Yeah.